construction. And then after the construction's done, we'll have a full-blown interpretive and education program on the canal again. We're doing things like redoing all 300 tree boxes along Wisconsin and M Streets, adding public art to the environment. In fact, public art and public art events like Georgetown Glow are a major focus of our 5-year plan. And the question is, will we be able to carry it out in the new environment? So we're continuing to do marketing events. That's from the 70s. We've never had an event like that during my tenure. But as you can see, we do 25 or 30 different things to market and promote Georgetown with events and promotions and gatherings and social media. We do advertising and really try to reach out to the hotel guests and the visitor on whom we're very dependent. So our research says that 92% of all the spending that occurs in Georgetown is done by people who do not live in the 27777 zip code. That means we're importing people to support our restaurants, hotels, retailers, spas, salons, and it's really important that we are able to figure out a way to keep the commercial district alive during this time when there are very few visitors to the city, so that we can, roar back when they are coming back. So that was the bid on March 14th. I don't have a ton of slides about what we've been doing since then. What I'll say is that we quickly pivoted as soon as the lockdown order occurred. We set aside $150,000 and created a Georgetown Employee Relief Fund. We've given out all that $150,000 and raised another, I want to say 70,000 above that, along with Halcyon, who's partnered with us. We created a $150,000 technical assistance program to help small businesses access the PPP funds and the EDIL funds from the federal government that the SBA put together. We've been doing disaster intervention since the looting took place about 3-4 weeks ago. It was mostly being covered by the Black Lives Matter. When I say covered by, there were some very peaceful demonstrators who came through Georgetown. They were accompanied by people who did not have peaceful intentions, and they used the Black Lives Matter as a screen to do some pretty nefarious things. And we had about 43 businesses that were looted, another dozen or so that were vandalized but not looted. And so we've been spending a lot of time working on that recovery. We've been distributing PPE, masks and sanitizer and things of that nature for the mayor, doing really extensive communications, and now we're rethinking public space. So, if you go down the streets of Georgetown today, this is what it looked like about a week and a half ago. M Street is now completely repaved for the first time in many years, but there's still a lot of plywood up that's coming down slowly as businesses slowly reopen. And we've been helping folks get their boards down and recycle the plywood. It's going mostly to Habitat for Humanity, and we're working with the retailers to get the message out that they're reopened and accepting customers again. While we're doing that, we're also exploring what we can do to create a safer environment. One of the mayor's directives is that people have to continue to wear masks in public space and distance at least 6 feet between each other, even outdoors. What that means is that we have to widen our sidewalks, and there are various different ways we can do that. This is what they did up in Montreal. It's the Red Road. It's actually a tourist attraction in and of itself, where they just took the parking lane and extended it all the way down the street. In the past, we've used the bike rack barriers. This is a streetery, sort of like a streetery. This is the Haleo in downtown, where they've just taken the parking lane and put tables out there. There are other things that are being done in other parts of the city with bike stops and bollards. So we've been putting signs up. We now have about 100 signs all over the commercial district asking people to wear masks in public. We've been passing out personal guides to each store so that each employee is familiar with the guidelines. It's really remarkable to me that, the Safeway up in Chevy Chase where I go, The customers are pretty good. It's the employees who are wearing the masks below their nose, or they're not paying close enough attention. And I feel bad for them, right? They're on duty 8 hours a day. They have to wear a mask 8 hours a day. But it's incredibly important that people maintain vigilance. And so we're helping people by reminding them, by distributing masks to the businesses so their employees are well covered, and trying to help them out. So, we're looking at various different ways of creating more sidewalk space. We're going to have to work with the city on reconfiguring bus stops and pickup and drop off zones, and facilitating garbage pickup and trash pickup from restaurants and businesses. And also, we've got a whole team of people working on it right now. And it's taking much of our time. So we're really trying to figure out, how do we get the commercial district up and running again safely, so that we don't have another surge in the district, and we don't have a situation where the mayor has to close it down again, which would be really devastating to a lot of our businesses. I will say that a number of national chains especially have told their landlords they're not coming back. We probably have a list of a dozen or more, from some who have left already, like Brooks Brothers, to some that we just heard about today, like Pete's Coffee, have said they've decided not to reopen their stores. They're walking away from them. A number of national fashion brands are not coming back. Most of the locals intend to reopen, and most of the locally owned businesses, and 60% of the businesses in Georgetown are local, do plan to reopen. And they're trying to work out a deal with their landlord to abate rent until they can start paying again, until they have revenue again. The landlords generally have been pretty good. And we're trying to be helpful in whatever way we can. So one of the questions that Lynn asked was, what can you do to help businesses recover? And the answer is, put on your mask, stay 6 feet away from everybody, and come out and do your shopping and your takeout and anything else you can at Georgetown businesses. The more you spend, the more likely they are to survive, so that when the crisis is over, we'll have a business district that's not a ghost town, which is really our goal. And we can get back to doing the things that we've been planning on doing, on enhancing everything before this all started. So those are all the slides that I have to share.
So, Joe, are you all right if I ask people if they have questions, they can either put it in the chat or raise their hand, and we'll be happy to unmute them. I think that's the best.
However you want to do it.
Okay. So if you have a question, you can either unmute yourself or raise your hand, and we'll recognize you. But I know there are those of you out there who do have questions about what's coming and questions for Joe. So this is an opportunity, and let's feel free to use it. Henry, did you want to start? You need to unmute.
He already answered my question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for asking. No.
No problem. No problem. Tony, it looks like you have a question. Okay, there you go.
Hi, Joe. This is Tony Russin. I was wondering, my husband, I'm the co-president of Georgetown Village, but and the village has a certain need right now that you might be able to help us with, and this might also bring more people downtown during the day. We would love to have an outdoor space where 5, 10, or maybe as many as 12 people could meet, spaced out properly for short periods of time, like for a couple of hours. Can you recommend a location in?
This morning, we put our street furniture back into a couple plazas. Fish Market Square, I don't know if you know where that is. That's just below the old Dean and DeLuca on the south side of the canal. So we've got, I want to say 8 or 10 tables out in that area. We've set them up so that they can't accommodate more than 5 or 6 people. That's the maximum size gathering that we feel comfortable promoting, and we've asked people not to move the tables around. But if folks get there, I know I see Tom Birch here on the call. I know he and Sydney are down there with some frequency because it's right outside my office window, and I'll sit with them. Well, I used to, and hope to again one day soon, sit out there. And people are just coming and going over the course of the day. My guess is that it's not terribly busy right now because all the offices are empty. So that would be a good place. I don't think we've put the furniture back yet up in back of Dean and DeLuca across from Blue Bottle. But if things go well this week down at Fish Market Square, I think we'll get the furniture up there by next Monday or Tuesday. We also have some furniture over at the plaza outside of HOK next door to Chaya on Gray Street. The Park Service asked us to pull the stuff in the park, so our stuff is not going back into Waterfront Park anytime soon.
Okay. As a follow-up question to Tony's question, do you know of any empty indoor space that could be used, since for some of our members, hearing might be difficult outside?
That's a really good question. You know, there are a lot of vacancies. I could put Lynn in touch with a couple of the owners of some of the vacant spaces to see if they'd make them available on an occasional basis. It would have to be scheduled. You'd have to have a property manager open it up, but there may be some that would be willing to do that for the village.
Good idea.
Great, thank you. I have an anonymous question. Oh, somebody, okay, Diane, 1 second. I had an anonymous question typed in, so let me ask that so I don't forget, and Diane, you'll be next. The question was, can you do anything about the homeless encampment as you walk into Georgetown on the bridge before you reach Georgetown? It's impossible to remain safely distant. You can't stay 6 feet away, and it's difficult for people to walk through that area.
Which bridge are we talking about?
It's the bridge as you walk into Georgetown.
M Street or Pennsylvania Avenue?
I imagine Pennsylvania, knowing the area, but I could be wrong.
I have not noticed that encampment. I mean, we have an encampment at 27th and K, and we have an occasional encampment, and a few people have been staying, next to the office buildings off of K Street, and a woman who's on Wisconsin Avenue. I'm not aware of the one.
It's the as you walk into Georgetown from Foggy Bottom. There's a bridge before you get to the big hotel. It's before you get to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. On the bridge there, on the left side, on the south side, there's a very long encampment. I think it's just one person, but it's blocked. It's got a big American flag wrapped around it.
I'll check that out tomorrow. So I'll be honest with you. We've really struggled with the issue of the encampments. We are blessed to have far fewer than some of the other commercial areas of town. There's a really large encampment over on M and First Street Northeast that the city has basically just thrown its hands up. They've not been trying to encourage people to go into shelters because the shelters are perceived to be unsafe and they don't want people getting COVID. And sadly, some of the encampments where there are people clustered together they've gone and tested, and a large number of the folks have tested positive. So the city's taken almost a hands-off approach during the crisis, feeling that people who are sort of off by themselves and not bothering anybody are probably safer themselves and safer for the rest of us if they're not disturbed. So they have not been moving the camps out. We do have a relationship with a number of the homeless people because we've known them for a long time, and we do have a social worker who's out trying to help them get into housing. And we've had some success over the last couple of years getting people into housing. So I'll go take a look at that and see if it's something that's been addressed yet.
Thank you.
So Diane, did you have a question?
Yes, Diane Salisbury, Joe. You talked about plans for the tree boxes along M Street and Wisconsin. Do your plans include planting trees in them?
We're working with the Urban Forestry Administration at DDOT to get trees planted in all of the empty tree boxes, and then we've got approval to put something called FlexiPave down, which is a rubberized material. So we come in with an air spade to try to aerate. What happens is, because people walk in the tree boxes, the soil gets compacted, and when the soil gets compacted, no water can get to the roots and the tree dies more quickly. So we're trying to preserve the trees that we've got. So we're going to start with the trees that are out there with compacted soil, get the soil all mixed up, put the FlexiPave down. The FlexiPave allows people to walk over it without doing soil compaction. There is a backlog. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but there's a pretty big backlog of trees that need to be planted. And so we'll be working with urban forestry over the coming year or two to get those tree boxes filled with new trees, and then to put FlexiPave down, which will hopefully allow them to thrive.
I thought that the grates that were put down for that purpose, so people could walk on them.
The problem is nobody maintained them, so they started collaring the trees, and they actually did more damage than help. And the other thing is, over time, the big heavy iron grates that were put down, the sidewalk moves, it pitches, the tree roots will push up on them, or they'll push up on the sidewalk, which pushes up, and so they become uneven and a tripping hazard, and it's an ADA violation. And the city just wasn't maintaining them, so the city is no longer using those. They're now about 19, 20 years old. They were put down as part of the Georgetown project when they redid all the underground utilities during the Williams administration. And the city's position on that now is that they won't be using those in the future.
Thank you.
Joe, Carol Kelly here with Georgetown Village. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm going to ask you a broad question, and feel free to answer it however you would like. We all enjoy the restaurants in Georgetown, and Georgetown Village has, extensively used them for happy hours and others of our activities. Any thoughts on, generally not answering about specific restaurants, but generally what you see happening with restaurants as they're, doing the curbside pickup, trying to stay open, reopening, and what kind of the landscape of the restaurants are going to look like in Georgetown, and when we can safely go into them again as a group? Yeah,
I don't want to give any public health advice. I'll tell you, my wife and I are not going to restaurants, even though they're open. I'm just on the cusp of the, I've got a couple more months before I'm in the wrong age group. Everybody has to decide for themselves if they're going to feel safe going into a restaurant. I'll say that the parts of the country where the restaurants have opened up indoor space and people have not been distancing or wearing masks or anything are the parts of the country that are experiencing the greatest number of cases right now. Having said that, outdoor dining seems to be a little safer, and there are a bunch of places down at the harbor, Billy Martin's, the places on Prospect Street. Almost all the restaurants on Prospect Street are doing outdoor dining, and it seems to be a little bit safer. And if there are, I think, restaurants that are going to be taking it more seriously than others, and I think that the key is to check to see who's really playing by the rules. There's nobody standing at the bar. They've really done a good job of spacing the tables out. The staff, if you walk by, you see everybody's wearing a mask properly. Those are the places that are taking this really seriously, and the places that I would consider, safe and to go into. The National Restaurant Association and the local restaurant association predict that somewhere between 20 and 30% of the restaurants that existed in the country won't reopen. We have seen a couple have closed and are not reopening. America Eats Tavern, Jose Andres' restaurant that just opened last year, is not coming back. As I said, Pete's Coffee is not coming back. The Starbucks on 3200 block of M Street is not coming back. Those are the only ones immediately that I know aren't going to survive. We have a suspicion that there are a few others that probably aren't going to make it, but we haven't heard. It was either a story yesterday or it was social media That a bunch of the restaurants on 14th Street are moving out now. Gibellina moved out yesterday. So we're going to see more and more of this across the city. It's been really devastating for the restaurant industry. So they're very appreciative when you do the takeout. They make a lot more money if you walk down and pick it up than if you have it delivered. The city had to pass a law to limit Uber Eats and Grubhub and some of the other delivery services to no more than 15%. In fact, if you really want to help them out, don't order it online, call them. Because if you order online, they all use these third-party services that they have to pay an enormous amount of money to as part of the service. But not all of them will take a phone call. Some of them say you have to order online. But if they take a phone call and order on the phone, and walk down and pick it up, and they'll, 15, 20% more goes into their pocket, which is a good thing.
Joe, it's Tom Birch. First of all, you can add Don Lobos to your list that's not coming back, the Mexican restaurant next to La Chaumière.
Yep.
The owner told me he talked to his landlord who was in Greece to see if he could do something about the rent, and the landlord said he couldn't. So then when Don Lobo told him he was moving out, he said, well, who could I rent to? Well, too bad if you're not going to work on the lease. Yeah. But my question is, we're all very anxious, I think, to see the boards come down off the businesses. There was some mention on the next door neighbor, chat, that the city had required the businesses to board up their windows. I found that kind of difficult to believe. So I'm wondering what's keeping our businesses, which really should not be sitting there anticipating the worst to come through again, from removing their boards.
I'd love to be able to report that there's been no attempt to pry any of the boards off or get in and take any of the inventory, but I can't. I do get occasional reports from property managers and retailers that there are still people, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get in through what had been a broken window and is now boarded up. So there are a few who are just, genuinely trying to protect what little merchandise or all their merchandise that they have left. Those, it's the crazy situation, Tom. Every single one of the retailers is unique in the way they're looking at the situation. So I'm talking to one property owner who owns a bunch of buildings, who says that one of their national tenants has not been in touch with them in 3 months. They laid off all the staff. They walked away from the store. The store got looted that Sunday night, lost everything. The landlord has been calling the tenants. Nobody has responded. We had some email addresses of managers. We emailed them both. They never responded. So the landlord boarded it up, and they still haven't heard from the tenant. The tenant has a destroyed store that's just sitting there. So we don't have any idea what they're going to do. That's on one extreme.
Yeah.
Then we have others. The folks that we've been really encouraging to take the boards down most aggressively are those who are open, right? And so we have a few folks who are open and haven't taken the boards up. Part of the reason is because any specialty glass was back ordered for a little while. Not only because there was so much glass damage in the city, so the glass installers are backed up, but because of COVID, apparently, some of the manufacturers have been operating at lower capacity. So we know a bunch of owners who want to take the boards off, but they can't get the glass replacement for, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever they've been told. So it's going to be a little while for those. But every single one of them is unique. I know Richard Levy has been banging on his tenants one by one to get the boards off and to get reopened. I think East Bank is doing the same thing. And then you've got a few of these national tenants who you just can't find, and we're not exactly sure what to do. So we've been talking to the landlords about working with artists to paint and decorate those storefronts, just to paint over the boards so they don't look so bad. And we've got a little bit of nice art going up now.
Yes, you do. I noticed it last time I was in town. I had a question. Barbara, did you want to talk about the sidewalk expansion?
Hey, Lynn, can I ask you a question before you ask? I had a view where I could see everybody, and then it got changed.
So you need to click gallery view.
I don't have gallery view for some reason.
Right-hand corner.
No, I have only 3 options. None of them are gallery view for some reason.
You don't have something exit full screen or go into full screen?
On the right hand side. Are you on an iPad?
Oh, no, yep, that's what it is. I had to exit. Thank you. Okay, much better.
Got it?
Yep, all good. Thanks.
There you go. So you can say Georgetown Village members taught you how to do this.
I am so bad with technology, I can't even, yeah, thank
But
you.
you know, we have an IT support group. You're always welcome to join.
What's
Okay,
the
Barbara,
minimum age to
please.
join Georgetown Village?
Sorry?
What's the age minimum to join Georgetown Village?
55, and it sounds like you're ready.
Oh, I've been there for many years, yeah, all right.
Barbara, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Hi, Joe, this is Barbara Hall. I'm on the board at Georgetown Village. You showed a quick photograph of the sidewalk expansion at Halejos. I thought that was terrific. Are you planning something similar for Georgetown?
Yeah, we've already done a couple.
And where is that going to be? And are you responsible, bid responsible, or is that the restaurant itself?
We work in partnership with the restaurant and with DDOT to permit them and get them in. So we've got one at Sushiria on K Street in the Ritz building. We've got that's reserved. I don't think they've opened seating there yet because I think we're waiting for some more materials. You have to put water-filled barriers and some other things in.
Right.
We've reserved the space, and also at the Berliner down on Water Street. They've got tables in the street now. The guidelines that the mayor's office put out last week require that you can't do a streetery like that on a bus route street. And we are working with DDOT to try to get a special exception for M Street so that Clyde's and a couple of the other restaurants would be able to do it. Pizza Paradiso. So we are working with them. And then I'm thinking that we may be able to do some of this on Prospect Street as well, but I can't remember if my staff is working with Franco and the other, and Shahab and the others up on Prospect. I know we talked about it in the meeting, but I don't know if they've reached out yet. I'm gonna turn a light on because I see that my face is in shadows from the room. One second. Yeah, it's a little better, not much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so our plan is to do a lot more of it. We're also talking to the city. The ANC has asked us to look into doing partial street closures on streets that don't necessarily need to carry through traffic. So the police department actually did a community meeting up at Martin's Tavern a week or two ago. And they just closed that little section of the N Street and put a bunch of tables out in the street, and everybody loved it. And the ANC commissioners came by and said, hey, why don't we do this all the time? So they're talking to us about that. And then there are a few other places like 31st Street north of the bridge where Il Canale and a couple other restaurants are located. We really have 4 restaurants there. So there's some talk about possibly just closing that in the evenings and putting tables and chairs out, similar to the streetery that they did in Bethesda, where they just closed a whole section of, I think, Fairmont Street, put tables and chairs out, and people could get their takeout and then sit outside in the middle of the street. So we're looking at that as well.
Yeah, this is probably a silly question, but with the schools still closed, is there any way we could utilize the playgrounds or parking lots or any of that for the restaurants?
That's an interesting question. We've attempted in the past to do a deal with the school system to use the parking on the weekends with no success. So I'm not sure that they would go for something like that, but we could certainly look into it. The city has been extremely progressive in its posture towards the restaurants to help them stay in business. So they've said, if you can find a space, 300 feet away to move on to, go for it.
Great.
And, I know that Clyde's was talking to the PNC Bank about setting up tables and a grill out there. There's another restaurant group that's talking to Jamestown about using the Dean and DeLuca Plaza. So I think people are trying to be creative, and Abra's been very permissive, let's say, to try to help people stay alive.
Great.
Interesting ideas. Interesting ideas. Thank you, Barbara. Emily, I know you had a question.
Yes. Hi. Emily Summers. I'm also with Georgetown Village. And I'm wondering if you've seen any interest in new merchants coming into Georgetown, perhaps because they can get a more favorable rent or simply because they see an opportunity there.
Yep.
And if the bid is doing anything to attract new businesses.
Yes and yes. When we saw that America Eats Tavern was moving out, I got on the phone with the building owner and I put him in touch with one restaurateur who I've been talking to about coming into Georgetown who's interested. And based on that conversation, he was talking to another one by coincidence, and they both toured that space today. So there are people who are actively looking at spaces in Georgetown as we speak. Retailers who are still building out their spaces. There's a bank that's still building out space. If you walk down to M Street right now, the former Ben & Jerry's is still under active construction and they're going to open as soon as they can. So I don't want to paint a picture that it's all doom and gloom. It's just a very challenging time, and we're not unique, right? We're facing an international challenge. Out of every crisis, there's something, right? Out of the last pandemic, right? The Spanish flu of 1919, you got some very good things and some not so good things, right? You had the progressive era with a lot of really terrific legislation that we still depend on today. You also got the Great Depression that followed. So I'm hopeful that we'll not have a Great Depression, but that we will have a rejuvenation, a renaissance because of it. And what might happen is that as fewer and fewer national tenants want to be exposed in the post-coronavirus and they're going to be online, it may just open an opportunity for more local entrepreneurs, the types who have been opening businesses in other parts of the city, to start saying, I want to be, in a neighborhood like Georgetown. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think we'll see more interest in food and beverage coming back to Georgetown because it's so walkable. And the spaces are smaller, right? The wharf is dependent on these enormous bars and restaurants. If we can't, the business model is such that you just need a lot of activity in those places. And if people don't want a crowd and they want smaller places, Georgetown might be well positioned for them.
And the wharf is a very small area, in fact. You're cramped right up to the water, and there's hardly any space to walk. Cabs go through in the middle. Georgetown's ambiance is a million times better than being on that wharf.
Well, it's also heavily dependent on the anthem, and it's unclear when the anthem is going to be able to reopen, or if it'll be able to reopen with the types of crowds. I mean, they have a capacity of 6,000 people, and a large portion of those 6,000 people were eating dinner at one of those restaurants beforehand and then going out for a drink afterwards. And so the whole economy down there was driven by that.
Oh, that's right. You had Arena Stage down there too, which was also helpful.
Very true. So I think they're going to have a struggle in their recovery as well.
Could I ask you, is there somewhere online that we can look to look at all your slides more slowly?
The slideshow, no, but I'm happy to share that with Lynn and she can let folks look at it.
I can share that on either our website or in our next email blast for you, sure.
Yeah, we can put it into a PDF for you.
Thank you.
We have a ton of information about what's going on in Georgetown on our website. If you've never been on the website, it's just georgetowndc.com. And it has everything from the COVID response and the programs that we're doing to what's open, what's closed, just lots and lots of information about what's going on in Georgetown.
It's georgetowndc.com.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I can put a link to it in the email blast as well as the slides so that you'll get all the information. There are other questions for Joe?
Joe?
Wait, I think, well, we have one, Joe. You're almost off the hook. Francis, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Can I jump in?
Sure, Johnny, go right ahead while I ask Francis to unmute.
Thank you. Joe, thank you for the presentation. Also, thank you for all the works that you folks are doing. It's great. My question is a little bit broader. In terms of the current pandemic that we have, but I think a lot of people would agree that we've had a much larger pandemic in Georgetown along the MN Wisconsin corridor for a while, where restaurants and retailers have been closing, and some of them are being replaced by financial institutions. Georgetown is a destination. People come here to shop, to dine, to stay in hotels and have a great time. What, from your perspective, is the cause of this, and how do we fix it as residents? Like, I love seeing all the tourists come in and do all the shopping and going to restaurants and whatnot. But even before the current COVID pandemic that we've been having, a lot of places have been shutting down for a while. So, what's your perspective on this?
Are we off the record?
I won't tell
I'm gonna say rent. I'm gonna say landlords and rent, but
no, it's greed. It's pure and simple. It's greed. It's personal profit over community good, right? We begged Kevin Plank not to put a bank on the corner of Wisconsin and M. Begged him through his people. You know, we never had access to him, and there was a bidding war between Chase and Capital One for that corner. And it became the most expensive building sale on a per foot basis in the history of the city by a factor of 2. Nobody ever spent more than, you know, a couple $1,000s a foot on anything. And I think that building, by the time they finished with the renovation, it was over $7,000 a foot. Just absurd, right? There's no economic case to be made. They just wanted to brand that corner of Georgetown. And if Capital One ever goes under, you know, they'll sell it for 1/7 of what they paid for it.
Excuse me, what's the corner where the bank is?
Wisconsin and M, the old Nathan's.
The old Nathan's. Who misses Nathan's?
It's a bank cafe, right?
Yeah.
So it's better than nothing. They have a Pete's Coffee and a banking teller, an ATM machine, but it's basically a banking station. It's a very unusual. They're trying to get the millennials to go into banks. You know, I've got 2 kids who are maybe post-millennial, maybe they're Gen Z, they're in their 20s. I don't think either of them have ever been into a bank. They're not, because there's just no reason to, right? They do all their banking on their cell phones. And so they're trying to figure out, you know, the banks are struggling to figure out, okay, how do I get people to walk into a branch and use it? Chase opened 2 branches in Georgetown, right? One at the old Nemes and one at the Sports Zone. And then they put an ATM down at Regency Row. And we've been begging people not to. United moved up onto M Street. They're going in next door to Indochine on the 3000 block. It's just all about money. They're willing. It's brand identity, and they just want to be where the other banks are. I think we now have 13 or 14 branches. It's absurd. There are places. So one of the reasons Capital One Cafe even exists is because in Philadelphia they passed an ordinance to say you couldn't put a bank on a corner. And so what Capital One figured out was, okay, so we won't have a bank, we'll have a coffee shop. And we'll have a banking services in the coffee shop. And it was so successful that they decided to replicate it around the country. We brought an idea forward, a zoning idea, to the CAG and the ANC about 2 or 3 years ago, and they did not want to adopt it, to say to the banks, look, enough is enough. You know, frankly, you could line every one of the banks up, give each one of them 1 desk and an ATM, and put them all into one place where everybody could go and do their comparative banking, and you wouldn't have to take this, you know, take all the space. And it wouldn't drive the prices. But nobody's been listening to me on this.
PNC probably gets more clients than anyone else.
PNC hasn't even reopened. PNC is one of the few that hasn't reopened.
You know where you can get on PNC? I went to Spring Valley yesterday in the heat, and I went to the drive-in window, and that's the only thing that's open. I stood at the drive-in window.
Yeah. So I'd love to be able to tell you that I had an answer to the banks. On the broader issue of retailers closing, we're in better shape than a lot of other parts of the country. Similar retail districts have really suffered. between the internet impacts and just changing behavior. It's one of the reasons, I'm really grateful to people like, Tom partnered with us, how long ago was that now? 5 or 6 years ago on the restaurant moratorium. It was a while. We've got really good feedback, and we've brought in a number of restaurants because there's no longer a barrier to entry for restaurants, and I'm hopeful that that'll be helpful. There's been at least 1 or 2 discussions with the ANC and the CAG about the possibility of repealing the tavern license moratorium, tavern license cap. We're the only neighborhood in the city that has a cap on taverns. There's 6 licenses, 2 in safekeeping, and only 4 places. So you don't create any sense of nightlife in the neighborhood, especially south of M Street. So we're looking at that. And then I think it's really up to the landlords to readjust the rents. I'll say that 2 of the biggest landlords have finally seen the light, drank the Kool-Aid, whatever you want to say, and they're doing percentage-only rents. And they're doing short terms. It used to be that the landlords would just squeeze the tenants, and they'd say, you have to pay a minimum plus, on sales over a certain amount, I get a piece of that, and you got to sign a 10-year lease, and I need a letter of credit for a guarantee. And the landlords are smarting up and realizing they're in a terribly competitive environment where there's going to be much more space looking for tenants than the other way around. And they're getting smart, and you're going to see rents drop. And when rents drop, if the city can, reduce some of the regulatory hurdles for businesses to open, I think you'll see a lot more folks opening.
I think Francis, you have a question for us, and you've been really patient. I'm sorry it took so long.
Well, my question is just, this has been such a wonderful learning experience. I really enjoyed your presentation, and unfortunately I missed the first maybe 5 minutes, and I see that it's being recorded. Could we get a link for the village?
So yes, we do record these programs, and we put them out in the email blast and on our website.
Great.
They're also on our YouTube channel. Let me just put in a plug. Georgetown Village does have a YouTube channel. Please visit it. And on our social media. I will say that I'm not quite sure we caught the very beginning in the recording, but Joe had said he was going to share his slides. So that's really what you missed, was at the beginning with the slides.
Yeah.
And I will make sure that you get them.
Thank you.
Well, the explanation of the slides too. That's
right. Well, we will share the slides. Were there any other questions for Joe while we have him? It's kind of a wonderful opportunity, and we don't want to lose it.
real quick. When you went to the Safeway and you were giving out, did you give them masks and say to the manager, why don't you tell how often do they change the mask?
Yeah, I did not. I should. It wasn't the Georgetown Safeway, and the Georgetown Safeway actually, even though I'm up in Chevy Chase, what I do is I go at like 11 or midnight because it's open and it's empty. I find it to be the safest time to go. And I made the mistake of going during the day to the little Safeway here, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. I didn't. I should have.
What little Safeway?
I didn't have any masks with me to get.
There's no little Safeway here.
You mean the one on Wisconsin Avenue? The Georgetown Safeway?
No, the one that I had the issue at was the one up on Connecticut Avenue at Chevy Chase Circle.
Oh, they're terrible. That's a horrible store. I mean, that's just. I was going to tell you, the Giant on Wisconsin Avenue is unbelievable. It was virtually empty at 11 o'clock in the morning on Friday, and there's one person in, one person out. Everyone was in masks, arrows. I mean, the only thing they didn't have was plexiglass, but we had to wait in order to check out until the other person was gone. It was phenomenal.
Emily, did you have another question?
I have to ask this since we're talking about grocery stores. Right. Do you know the status of Whole Foods on Wisconsin Avenue in Glover Park?
I knew the status before COVID. They had worked out a settlement between the tenant and the landlord, and they were planning to return. I don't have any updates since then. That was in probably late February, early March.
Mm-hmm.
So
everyone was very excited about that.
Yeah, but what I tell everybody is the world has changed since then, so I don't want to make any assumptions that anything that was decided then is still on track.
Did they tell you at that point how long they thought it would take to renovate the store?
No, I didn't. I just read this story in the paper. That's it.
I have to say that Trader Joe's is fantastic as well.
Yes, absolutely.
They're
Totally agree.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in my dream of dreams, we'd have something like that moving into Georgetown, right? And I know that we've been talking to the folks at Jamestown who own Georgetown Park, and they have the proprietary lease from the city on the old Dean and DeLuca building, the market building. They are really aggressively trying to get a supermarket or a market of some kind into that space. They've talked to probably every grocer between here and Ohio with no luck, but they are continuing to try to find somebody who's going to do a real market in that space, because they recognize that it'll be an anchor for the entire part of the commercial district. It'll bring a lot of people down there who will also use some of the other stores.
Joe, not just the former Dean and DeLuca. Most of the space in Georgetown Park, I live right on top of it, is pretty much empty.
Yeah.
So it can actually host a fantastic grocery store down there in the center of Georgetown. So
yeah, most people don't realize that the Dean and DeLuca space that you see is about 7,500 square feet, but there's another 14,000 square feet of basement under it. Because there's a full basement under the building itself, and then the breezeway between the Georgetown Park building and the Dean and DeLuca building, that's a basement. It's not dirt.
Yeah.
There's a full basement down there, so there's a lot of space that you could do a grocer in.
Can you park underneath there?
Well, you park in Georgetown Park, and then you can walk through. Yeah.
What about the ANC, the movie theater? It sounds like they're going to go bankrupt. Is that true?
Could be. It's hard to imagine that they won't, but I don't know. I have no.
That would be a real loss.
Yeah.
I thought
Well,
they were going to
what they'll do if they go bankrupt is they'll reorganize, and hopefully, somebody will be willing. If it's not them, let's read, or somebody else will be willing to open space if they don't. But I don't. There's just no sense of when it's going to feel safe to go to a movie again.
Yeah.
And they had that. Was it Regal or AMC who had that PR disaster last week, where they announced they weren't going to make people wear masks?
AMC. That was
Yeah,
AMC.
and within a matter of hours after they released that, they did a 180 and said, no, we'll require masks.
No, not good. Barbara, did you want to ask something before we close up? No.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about all that empty space. Jose, you mentioned that Jose Andres is leaving. Was that a decision made before the virus?
No. I think I think the restaurant was not doing as well as they had hoped it would do, but they had not made a decision to leave until the virus hit.
Might he reconsider coming back with another venture?
Jose likes Georgetown a lot. He and I, folks, have talked about as many as 4 concept restaurants, and I'm just sorry that he started with America Eats, because I think that had that been I think that part of it was they didn't want to spend a huge amount of money redoing the space, and Richard Levy felt very strongly about wanting barbecue in the space, and they reached an agreement on which concept. I think the name, was a difficult name for the space. It came off like a tourist place. But my sense is that had he opened a Leo or an OML or one of his other concepts, it might have done well here. He's talked to us about, opening in a bunch of spaces, and his people have toured a number of spaces in Georgetown. The numbers are very hard to do for him because he is so well known, so popular, that the new developments, new buildings will basically build him a new restaurant and hand him the keys if he'll agree to come, because they can lease the space above more easily if they've got a really terrific restaurant on the ground floor. Nobody in Georgetown is going to do that. Nobody's going to build a right?
Yeah.
So it's much more expensive to come here than it is to go other places.
Yeah.
But he likes Georgetown. He has been sniffing around.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so I know people don't like to stare at a screen for much more than an hour, and we are just about there. So Joe, I thank you very much for your time and for your willingness to answer our questions and fill us in on what's going on in the community. I thank all our participants, particularly Carol and Emily, who have worked so hard to set this up. And by the way, we are not taking off for the summer. We are not closing for COVID. We are going to keep going. So I just will put out to those of you on the email, on the call today, July 8th, Lynn Glassman, who was on the call earlier, will be doing something on remote life, how to look our best while online. I know I could use some help. I think the rest of you look great, but I know I could use some help. And then Barbara Hall, who is also on the call today, will be talking about philanthropy, pandemic, and protests. So Lynn is on July 8th and Barbara is on July 22nd. August 5th, we have Brooke Pinto joining us. So that's an opportunity to meet your newest ANC commissioner and hear a little bit about what she thinks, and a council member, I'm sorry, learn a little bit about what she thinks and what her plans are. As you know, she'll be running again in the November election, but for now she is filling the seat vacated by Jack Evans. And on August 19th, we are bringing Bill Plant back, and he's going to be talking about fake news and real journalism. So those of you who had the opportunity to hear him interview Madeleine Albright in May, have the opportunity to hear him speak for himself in August. So please come back and join us. I will continue to share this information on social media. It'll be on Nextdoor. It'll be on the CAG listserv. And we thank you for joining us tonight. And again, I thank Joe very much for your time and look forward to hearing from you about those empty storefronts we might meet in.
I'll be back in a couple of years. Hopefully I'll have some good news.
Okay, I hope so. Well, welcome to have you back anytime you want to talk to us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.